Hello again, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch Podcast, the show where I do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. Got a really special show this week. I had the opportunity to interview author Lasara Firefox Allen about the new book, Jailbreaking the Goddess, a radical revisioning of feminist spirituality, which launches today, July 8th, through Llewellyn Publications. So this is a two-part interview, and you're about to listen to part one. In part one, we discuss how she's feeling about the launch and how she deals with haters, being a feminist personality. We talk about trans-exclusionary paganism and gender identity, cultural appropriation, and some ethical practices to employ during pagan events and rituals. So if you are someone that organizes pagan events or rituals, or you're looking to, this is a good episode to get some tips on that. So listen up, and then go out and get the book from Amazon or Llewellyn, and definitely request it at your local metaphysical shop. For Canadians dealing with the Canada Post strike, there is a Kindle version on Amazon, so you can get that instantly. Okay, so here we go. Part one of my interview with Lasara Firefox Allen. So I am incredibly excited right now. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm really excited.
Excellent. I am too.
So the book comes out Friday, right? Friday's your official release date?
Yes, Friday the 8th is the official release date of Jailbreaking the Goddess. It has been in what I'm calling soft launch for a month at this point. So a number of people have copies, but the official launch is not until Friday.
Yeah, I was wondering because I saw a few people posting online that they had picked up a copy at Barnes & Noble or other places at bookstores already, so I was kind of wondering. But the 8th is your official launch. That's really exciting. Are you excited?
I am. I'm excited. I'm overwhelmed. It's a learning curve. A percentage of being a successful writer is writing a book, but it's not the highest percentage, unfortunately.
No, I absolutely believe you.
Yeah, so right now I'm thoroughly... My learning curve for the last number of months now has been how to market a book. This is my second book, Sexy Witch came out a decade ago, but it's a whole new it's a completely different world.
Yeah, the world of books has absolutely changed a lot, even in just 10 years. It's changed so much. Were ebooks even really a thing back in 2005?
Not like they are now.
They are now.
Yeah, not like they are now by any stretch. And additionally, and I have an established platform, so that's good.
Yeah.
But that component of authordom is a whole other beast, and so needing to learn how to be a more effective online presence and the marketing stuff is its own challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, if people don't know about the book,
they're not going to buy it. Yeah. And especially, being an outspoken feminist, on the internet, especially with social media it can be kind of scary. It can be super scary.
For sure.
Have you gotten any sort of negative backlash have you gotten any kind of memorable negative backlash in response to the book?
Yes, and I try, not to sound too hippie about it, but I try not to attach to it. It's better for my personal well-being if I don't over-attach to the detractors. Mm-hmm. When my older kid was a preteen, we got her a shirt that said, "I heart my haters." That's kind of
I love it.
my personal motto. I heart my haters. They're doing their job. They're out there doing their thing, and the best thing that I can possibly do is only interact when I have the spoons for it. Are you familiar with spoons theory?
Absolutely. I have a chronic pain disease, so spoons are my whole life.
Me too. So I live with fibromyalgia, and then I also have bipolar disorder. So some days I wake up and I'm all I get to do today is survive. Today is a survive day, and that's going to be my big win,
Yeah, absolutely.
You know how it is. So some days I'm and right now my plate is so full with the marketing that I'm not even having arguments for fun right now.
It's only the important arguments now. I'll save the fun ones for later.
Right, exactly. So, like, the most vocal opposition, there are two quarters, of course, we could anticipate there are two quarters of vocal opposition to the ideas that I'm putting out there. One, of course, is the whole menemist movement people who just, irk me to no end.
Oh, they're just so colorful.
I have a hard time taking them seriously.
Me too.
And then when I do take them seriously, it ruins my day. So
taking them seriously is honestly just too scary. It's almost like Donald Trump, right? At first it was kind of funny, and then when people thought about it too hard, it got horrifying. And I feel like Meninists in general are kind of the same way.
Yeah, they're horrifying. Oh. And it's a spectrum, of course. So in my opinion, some people don't even identify themselves as menimists, but they are. Yeah. And so I really try to... I was a lot more tolerant 3 months ago than I am now, to be honest. And it hit a point where I realized that the sort of menimist contingent was detracting from the experience that my fan base or my client base was having. Yeah. And so I just started blocking people who obviously were just there to mess with us.
Yeah. Yeah. They weren't contributing anything. They didn't have any real problems. They just wanted to hate something.
Right. And it's not like anybody's mind was going to be changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of spinning my wheels is no longer entertaining to me. So I don't feel like it adds to my platform. So I just mostly will tend to block people who go too far in that direction on my social media. The other contingent of people who are having, opposition to the book is unfortunately within feminism. Yeah. And so that is, of course, dicier. And that, of course, is the trans exclusionary contingent.
They're probably my least favorite. They're my least favorite. And they've been popping up in my life a lot lately, and I don't understand where these people came from and how I never realized there were so many.
They've been here forever.
Yeah. It's horrible. I was just like, I didn't know there were this many people in my life that were horrible. Like, I've been culling my Facebook list. It's just horrible. Yeah.
So those folks, I will engage with at times, but I also have blocked some people. And the reason that I block people, like my bottom line is if someone is making me feel unsafe, then I block them.
That's not smart. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I figure if I'm a brave, strong person, so if I'm being triggered by them to the point where I don't feel safe, I know that people on my stream have already hit that threshold long ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm instantly put off when I see, it's always, I just see it online, especially I'll see just a little sentence and it'll say something like, the last, exclusive goddess only space or something like that. And I'm like, wait a minute. Right. Wait a minute. That's not good. Something about that is wrong. And you dig a little further and you find out that everything's horrible.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So, and I personally exist on the non-binary spectrum. Yeah. Gender. I am relatively like female presenting, like traditionally female presenting in a lot of ways, but my internal terrain is not that. Yeah. And anyone who's intimate with me knows that I'm not that. So, and the interesting thing about passing privilege is that if I don't come out, people don't know. So I come out as regularly as I need to.
Yeah, and then you hear all those secret thoughts that people wouldn't say if they knew you just a little bit more.
Right, exactly. So, and then the other complicated component, in addition to the book being, radically inclusive.
Absolutely, which I loved, by the way. It was so radically inclusive and unashamed of how radical it was. But like it the book never once apologized for being essentially a social justice warrior, which made me super happy. Super happy.
Excellent. Yeah. I there's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing to apologize for in that arena, for sure.
Absolutely.
And then the other added element is that my kid is trans. My younger child is trans.
Yeah.
And trans non-binary. And that is a whole thing in itself, of course, like, as a parent, to be navigating that with your child is a big deal anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then having a somewhat public persona amplifies that in some ways. And then having published a book that trans exclusionary people are going to target amplifies it yet again. And I have never had anyone be so mean to me about my parenting as the trans exclusionary contingent of the pagan community.
Which is so unusual. It's just, especially because there's the trans exclusionary crowd is almost exclusively made up of parents or people who intend to be parents, and to have them, especially in a religion or a spiritual path that is supposed to be so open, to have them, trying to make you force your child into some little box it's unusual. It has never made sense to me, and it will never make sense to me, which is why I liked your book so much. The second I read that little paragraph, I'm like, this is exactly it. It doesn't make sense that so many pagans are so trans exclusionary, especially because they're so not homophobic as in general as a crowd. So
that one of the complex elements of this, it's very complicated. And here's the thing. I've been queer I've been out as queer for my whole adult life. I started identifying as queer when I was in my early teens. Yeah. It had somewhat to do with who I'm sexually attracted to, which has very little to do with, I won't say it has little to do with their genitals, but I will say that it has much more to do with who they are in my life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that I'm demisexual. I'm totally not. But for me to have an emotional connection with someone, it's less about whether they're, for one thing, I unlink emotional and sexual connections too, right? Like we have a lot of emotional connections. I think our whole language around relationships is garbage, to be honest.
It really is. I'm struggling in the last couple of years. I don't even have a sexual orientation, and there's no word to describe what it would be. And, and I have no words to describe even how I feel to make other people understand. And I'm like, I feel like this is probably a problem.
Right, exactly.
Because I'm not a kid. I'm 30. I should have at least one word I can use.
Yeah, my kid, who is 16, is, of course, has how do they even, they're very clear on who they're attracted to. Yeah. And yet there's no term that they can use. It's very complicated.
It's super complicated.
And then for me, I'm 45, and I remember when, back in the 90s, when it's kind of, I don't want to call it a trend, but people started coming out as being trans. I'm not saying that more people were trans all of a sudden, because I don't believe that. I don't believe we have more trans people now than we did.
No, I feel like we have more people that are actually able to say they're trans than we used to.
Exactly. Yeah. And the people who a generation ago would have been completely stealth, don't have to be at this point, and thank goodness. Right.
It's better. It's outrageously better.
Right.
When I watch, old movies or TVs or something from the 90s, a lot of times I'll have this horrible moment where someone just says a really awful transphobic joke, and I'm like, whoa, you can't say that. And I'm like, oh my god, this feels 20 years ago. Years ago that was totally normal.
Right. Yeah. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
I'm shocked almost every day. Thanks, Netflix.
Yeah, for sure. And, I mean, it's so important to have that perspective. So I'm glad that we do have ways to check ourselves on that. But so in the 90s, people started coming out as trans. I was in the Bay Area for the most part, and in Seattle, and people were coming out as trans. And it was in the lesbian community, which I've never been lesbian identified, but I've spent a lot of time in lesbian community. I like women's space. I like being in lesbian community. I like being in, gay community. I like being in trans community. I like being in queer community. I like being surrounded by queer people. It makes me feel happy. So, wherever the queer people were, that's where I would go. So I ended up, I had a lot, I would say more so than now even. I had a lot because I live rurally and our community is relatively small here. But I had a lot of lesbian friends in the 90s. I was very deep in and kind of in that BDSM community also. There was a lot of crossover in my scene in the Bay Area in the 90s. And
it was so big in the 90s. Even here, I live in Windsor, Ontario, which is fairly small and backwards is a good word for it. Even here, we had really cool BDSM clubs that closed all right before I was legal to go to bars.
Right.
But there were a bunch of them, and there was a huge overlap between those functioned as a gay bar, even though they weren't a gay bar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a safe space. Because there's a lot of negotiation that happens. People are safe to say what they want and who they are, and and that's awesome. I really value the BDSM community for that. It's not perfect. It has its flaws. There are issues of consent. It's being looked at. It's just as I point out in Jailbreaking the Goddess, right? All countercultures exist within the dominant culture.
Yeah. Issues that persist in our culture all show up a little bit in those little subcultures and countercultures. They're all there just a little bit.
Or a lot, as the case may be. And I think the less that we acknowledge them, the bigger they get.
I agree.
Which is why Jailbreaking is the book that it is.
Yeah.
It's because my whole thing is until we look at this stuff realistically, it's going to remain.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, when this, people started coming out as trans, and a lot of it, there had been more visibility in the queer community of trans women than trans men. So in the 90s, it's been talking about the coming out of many young trans men. And there were a lot of lesbians at the time who felt betrayed.
Yeah.
They felt like they were losing their butches.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like they were losing part of their numbers. They felt like that previously queer couples were now heterosexual couples. They felt that, and this was an ongoing conversation. This was a conversation that was happening across the counterculture of, the lesbian scene in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And so those were the seeds of the issues that are still here today around trans exclusion.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Well, I mean, it doesn't, but
it does.
It does.
Yeah,
I don't think their issue doesn't make sense, but I get how that came about and how that's persisted for sure.
Yeah. So a lot, the vast majority of the people who are notable trans exclusionary feminists are lesbians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah.
I did notice that. Which, again, is odd.
Right. And for those of us who are not trans exclusionary, it's a total, sorry to swear, but it's a total head fuck. It's like, what?
It's like, why would you do that? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Would you like someone to be that way towards you? Because I'm pretty sure you say all the time that that's not cool. So,
right.
Take your own advice here.
Right. Exactly. So my feeling is obviously you wouldn't support sending kids to, gay correction camp.
Yeah.
Like, why would you support the parallel with making a child stay in a gender presentation that is not accurate for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially back in the 90s, that presented itself in like really disturbing ways. There's the story of that young boy, and he had so many names that I honestly can't remember, but he had an actual physical problem with his genitals when he was born. And his parents made that decision to have him live as a female. And it was just like, in his very short life, because he ended up committing suicide, he went through so many different gender presentations and so many horrific issues that it just, he didn't have a real identity or a life that he felt that he could live.
Right.
And it's just, that's an extreme situation, but I don't see that as all that different than, when your kid comes to tell you that they think they're trans, telling them, no, you're not, you just have to stay the way they are. I don't really see that as much different than a forced surgery. Maybe it's physically different, but otherwise I feel like it causes the same problems. That should have been a really good warning to everybody, and I don't think people took it seriously.
Yeah, right. And it's, it's the same story that's happening every day.
Yeah.
So, and when we, one of the arguments from the trans exclusionary contingent is, 12 is too young to make a decision that is going to affect the rest of your life. Well, 12-year-olds are killing themselves every day because they're being forced to live in a gender that doesn't fit them. Yeah. So, and also, as I say, I go deeply into all of this in Jailbreaking the Goddess, in that there, the gender binary is colonization.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are colonized by a binary system of gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and in, more, I would say I'm not an anthropologist, but the amount of study that I've done around this topic is fairly considerable. And I would say it is far more common in, indigenous cultures for there to be more than two gender representations.
Yes, absolutely. Lots of cultures all over the world have, what they usually call a third gender, or an alternative gender for people who don't fit into the two that are regularly presented. And that's fairly common in lots of different cultures around the world.
Right. And interestingly, some cultures have as many as like 30 genders.
That's so awesome.
So, and, or 16, like some cultures have something called the meta gender.
Yeah.
Some cultures have, the idea of, a man and a woman and a man-woman and a woman-man, and then that's 4 genders.
Yeah.
So there is no, we like to reduce things because it makes us feel comfortable. But the fact of the matter is that gender is complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so all that we can do in the end is to create spaces that are inclusive.
Yes.
Right.
Which Jailbreaking the Goddess absolutely was. It was so aggressively inclusive. I was so excited about it. So excited. Because I get in trouble a lot with other people. You don't have to be a screaming feminist all the time. And it's like, yeah, but I do, though. Like, I only have one speed, and this is it. And you need to get on my level. And it's just, I'm always just getting in trouble for stuff like that. And I'm like, how am I too inclusive? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not. Like, it's just...
Right. And tone policing is the craziest thing. When people are like, you're too angry or you're too abrasive. It's like, I'm only angry because you didn't hear me all the other times when I wasn't angry.
Yeah. Like, I've been saying this forever, and I was really calm for a while. I didn't just start here, so that's really your fault. That's really your fault.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, if you want me to be less angry, listen more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I bitch about this stuff all the time in a way that's like funny or easy to listen to. You should just listen more.
Exactly.
So, did you ever feel personally disconnected from the goddess due to the triple goddess model? Did you ever feel like a personal disconnection from your faith because of that?
I would say yeah. I definitely have, in the context of working within the Maiden Mother Crone system, I would say that there have been times where I felt alienated, which is part of why this book came into being. But I also have personal relationships with deities who don't actually automatically fall into the Maiden, Mother, and Crone archetypal system. Yeah. So I still had a connection to my own spiritual path. I also have had a very diverse spiritual history. I ended up studying Islam for a while in 2007, which was mind-blowing, and definitely changed my feminism and my spirituality for the better.
I believe that. I was reading a little bit about the time you spent in the Middle East, and it was awesome. What a great story. What a great story. Yeah. It's one I think a lot more people need to read. People need to hear more about very positive feminist experiences coming out of the Middle East and coming out of Islam. They need to hear more of those because it's wonderful. It's wonderful, and it really changes your perspective sometimes.
Well, it certainly changed mine. And, I had no way of knowing before I was there what it would be like. And so allowing myself to really give myself to surrender completely to that experience, really just changed a lot for me. It was, it was a spiritual accelerator for me. Because I dove in and I released so many attachments to, who I thought I was and what I thought feminism was, and being able to experience this whole, this culture that in the Western world, we really have no actual real concept for.
Yeah.
Everything that we think about, pretty much everything that we think about Islam is not accurate.
So true. So true.
So being able to go in there and just, really allow myself to enter into the community and the traditions and even the religion was, amazing for me.
Super cool experience.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So what other cultures and religions have framed your very feminist spirituality?
Well, I was raised in the counterculture here in California. So I was raised with, West Coast spiritual traditions in the 70s and 80s. And at that time, we definitely didn't have the concept of cultural appropriation was not a thing that we were talking about. I know it existed outside of white culture, right? But as white New Age pagan hippies on the West Coast, it was not something we were tuned into. And also, I have blood family that is Native American, and so I did have that. Native American tradition was something that my mom drew upon in my upbringing. And, when I say Native American tradition, I'm talking about like the thing that we think of as like pan Native American tradition, which of course is actually not Native American tradition. It's kind of a morass of different traditions all lumped together. Yeah. Although as I've grown older, I have, started kind of looking at what those elements are. What I feel like we're blessed to be living in a time where indigenous tribes and communities and nations the world over are really reclaiming their traditions via language, spiritual practices, etc. On the west coast of the states here, we're surrounded by Native American communities who never fully lost their traditions, which is also a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I draw a lot of inspiration from just watching people find their roots, any people, whoever we are, finding our roots and working on reimagining our own traditions. I would say also another element that we need to be aware of, and I do talk about this in Jailbreaking the Goddess, there's a fine line. We need to be careful as we align ourselves with our own traditions, right, and start re-evaluating and reconceiving our kind of genetic traditions even.
Yeah.
We do need to be careful not to be end up in an exclusionary bent.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the conversation about cultural appropriation, I think that's so essential that we stay away from that kind of mentality that leads to like concepts of racial purity.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely do. It's I don't know, sometimes with cultural appropriation it's hard to figure out when you're going too far. With being anti-appropriation, I guess it's hard to explain. You don't want to go from saying, I think we should acknowledge the fact that a lot of these things we do come from this culture, and maybe we should ask them the proper way to do it, or if it's okay. And I feel like there's a fine line between going from that, which is fairly responsible, to, no, we can't do this because we're white, and the only people that can do this are the people from within that culture, and if anyone else does it, it's bad. I feel like there's a fine line between those things, and it's really easy to go just a little bit too far.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I think I offer a lot of tools to address that in Jailbreaking the Goddess.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely do. You specifically mention getting in touch with the people from that culture, especially with individual goddesses. Get to know her people and talk to them and ask to be included, ask how to study things, ask questions, but that they don't owe you anything. And if they tell you to get lost, you just have to respect that. And I really liked that because another book I read on goddess spirituality just never said any of that. Just completely left it out. And I was like, wow, you really should have put like some disclaimer somewhere. So many of the goddesses in the book were from like closed religions. I'm like, this makes me super uncomfortable. So
right. Well,
I really liked that you addressed it. I really liked how you addressed it in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's tricky. And the fact of the matter is, like, that mentality that you're talking about in the other book is a legacy of like imperialist, colonialist mentality.
Yeah, it's nothing new to pagan, Wiccan spiritual books. It's nothing new to that at all.
Right. As white people, we just think that we automatically have the right to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I still have a lot of books on Wicca that, I bought back in the 90s when Wicca was really popular. And a lot of those books, I look at now and I'm like, oh gosh, this is really fucking bad. Like, this is so horrifying. And when I read this other book that I had read recently, it was a brand new book. And it read almost exactly like these books that were published in the 70s to 90s. And I was just so shocked. I'm like, 20 years ago, I would have thought this book was great and totally normal. And now I see that the whole thing is completely, like, in the trash problematic. So it's outrageous that within, like, Wicca, which is predominantly white, we've literally been doing the same thing and releasing the same books for 20 years that have been appropriating other people's cultures, and we just no one's catching on that. That's so messed up. That's so messed up. How have we not progressed at all?
Yeah, right.
And how has no one how have none of these closed cultures ever been like, Wiccans, we're really sick of your shit. And not just Wiccans, I feel bad because I pick on them, but they're the most popular. But it seems odd to me that none of these cultures have spoken up and told us that they're really sick of our shit.
Well, and I think people do, and it has happened in the last couple of years, especially. Certain groups have called out. And I don't want to name names because I don't want to call undue attention to people, but I will say that certain organizations have been called out, and some of them have responded better than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I know at a lot of conventions and festivals, things have been changing with some of the dominant organizations that plan the festivals or show up at the festivals. I know quite a few of them have changed, or some have disappeared. Right. And there was a Michigan feminist festival that was notoriously trans exclusionary, and they've since stopped operating. They're no longer a festival, which I think is a pretty great idea.
Right. So
things are changing.
One of the things that could be a good start, just in general, would be for organizers of events to, especially like outdoor camp out, camps, etc.
Yeah.
And festivals and such, to get in touch with the tribal or, First Nations community that has claim to that land. Right?
Yeah.
Some of the situations that I've heard of, specifically in the last couple of years, have had to do with land rights issues, because the United States government and the Canadian government are still breaking treaties with Indigenous peoples, right?
Oh, absolutely they are.
Every day.
Yeah.
So when we get a permit from the Parks Department to hold an event on, national lands, and we don't go to the tribal community that has claim to that land, we are reinforcing the breaking of that treaty.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. I don't think people really think of that, because they've illegally anyways, dotted all their I's in that situation. But there is just a kind of an unspoken ethical, act that you can do to make sure you are being a little bit less culturally appropriative in your festivals and stuff like that. Right.
And another element that, in the groups that I've been working with, another element that I've been trying to pull in, and it's hard to get traction, is to invite the Indigenous community into the event for free.
Yeah.
To allow any tribal members, enrolled or unenrolled, to enter the event as guests, to include the tribal members who are spiritual leaders in the dedication ceremonies.
That's a great idea.
If they want to be included, to collaborate in ways and to make sure that what we are doing on, in a perfect world, what would be land that were owned by this tribe or nation, right? In a perfect world, they would own that land. So we should be making sure that what we're doing there it feels safe and good to them.
I think that's a fantastic idea. That's a really, really good idea. I went to my first pagan campout recently, and I mean, so much of it is taken from Native culture. You have lots of drum circles and smudging ceremonies, and it's very, especially with the new age hippie type pagan, which is popular in my area. A lot of it is very Native American influence, but there's no real Native American presence. I'm sure there are Native people there, but there's no real large Native American presence. And I feel like that would be an awesome idea, and it would sort of authenticate everything that's happening at your festival. your smudge ceremonies would mean just a little bit more. Your drum
Right.
circles would have different beats that hit different notes inside your consciousness. I feel like that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, well, and so that, to loop back to the question, like, why haven't communities brought it to our attention that we're fucking them over, basically, my feeling is that it's really our responsibility if we really want to be, good community members, if we really want to be in alignment and collaboration and creating something that is beneficial to the whole. It's our job. It's our job to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Is that okay? 2, would you like to be involved?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Because it's not there. I mean, Jesus, like the indigenous people I know have plenty to do every day, just dealing with the basics of oppression.
Yeah. Oh, I believe it.
So you have to choose your battles, and I get why the question of whether
why aren't they following us around and keeping us in check?
Sure,
Yeah, they've got other people to follow around.
They've got other stuff to do.
Yeah.
So and so one of my very, very closest friends is a local indigenous person, and she and I have gone to a number of festivals together. I've invited her to go to festivals with me as a teacher, and brought her in to certain festivals, and it's hard work, and she bravely volunteered when I was like, hey, I would like for you to come do this stuff with me. Your voice is missing. We need your voice there. Like, there's a doorway. It's open. Come on in if you're game. At first she was like, that seems like a horrible idea. But thanks for asking. And then she was like, okay, well, let's give it a try. We gave it a try for a couple years. And then we were like, okay, that experiment's over with because it was too painful.
I believe it.
Honestly. And like, walking around as an indigenous person in the world today, just walking around is, constantly you have to decide what you're going to be pissed off about, because there's plenty to be pissed off about all the time, right? I mean, so think about it. You're just
I believe
woman,
that. Yeah, I believe that.
Walking around, you're a woman of size walking around.
Yeah.
You have to decide what you're going to be pissed off about today, right?
Oh, absolutely. I know that feeling.
Right? And what parts are going to be like, oh, well, it's not worth my time. I'll just block that person or whatever. Right? So as an indigenous person, like, you're dealing with a bunch of different elements constantly of like, what am I going to allow to affect me today? And so when I brought my friend Corinne into the festival scene, watching her have to make the decisions moment to moment about what she was going to be offended at and what she was going to let go of, just watching process it was exhausting, because in, quote unquote conscious festival community, people are constantly appropriating indigenous culture.
Constantly. I feel like that one is, indigenous culture especially has really been picked to pieces by like the neo-pagan community, really a lot. And most of them have no idea what they're doing or wearing comes from, and it's hard to watch sometimes. It's very hard to watch.
Yeah, it's really really hard, really crazy. And like the first day that we were at a festival, Corinne and I walked in, I was standing outside the bathroom. She walked into the women's restroom and she walked out, and she looked like she had just like seen someone die. I mean, her face was, I was like, what happened?
Oh no.
She was like, there's a girl in there who's like dressed as Pocahontas.
Oh my God. Oh, that's so horrible.
Like, right. That is a thing. Yep.
Yeah, I'm every time Coachella season rolls around,
Right.
the internet becomes the worst place in the world. And
Right.
I just have to log out for like a week because I'm like, I can't look at these teenagers grossly appropriating someone else's culture, and like they know they're doing it, and Native communities are constantly like, please stop doing this.
Right.
And it's
exactly.
I
So
can't
that's
imagine
why they're
how
not.
that felt
That's
for her.
why,
That's so bad.
exactly. That's why they're not following us around, being like, "Hey, you're pissing us off."
Because there are other fish to fry here. There are so many fish.
Exactly. So my point being, if we want to be, good community members to our Indigenous community, then we need to show up to that relationship and be proactive in it.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. That's, oh my gosh, Pocahontas.
Yeah.
What year is this? How do you still not know?
Oh, I know. And, the girl was probably like 19 and thought that, like Pocahontas was her favorite Disney film or something. I don't know.
So bad.
Well, I have no idea how it happens.
That's probably exactly how it happened, honestly.
It's all the color of the wind.
Oh. And you know what that movie's like? It's pretty fun when you don't know, and then years later, the story gets ruined when you learn the real story, and you're like, oh, I don't love this. And yet I still see them in Halloween stores every year.
I know, right? So exactly.
It's so awful. It's so awful. I hate when people wear anyone else's real life as a costume. It drives me completely crazy. Completely crazy.
Right. Exactly. And it's rampant. It's still rampant in our community. And like people's indiscriminate use of the word gypsy, for example, which...
It's great. I can't believe that's so pervasive still.
Yeah.
Still. Yeah. That's actually a big one. I have like in my list of future podcast episodes, I want to dedicate like a whole episode to just that, because just that is really, really bad. And when I point out to people that's a racial slur, and that really hurts people when you say that to them, if they are, from the culture, they're like, oh my God, you're just like taking it way too seriously. And like, when people have, a Pinterest board or whatever that's, gypsy boho, it's all white girls in their early 20s, like at Burning Man and stuff. And I just, that's so obviously not right. It's so obviously not right. How are you still doing this? Especially because it's not like that's a culture that's disappeared.
Right.
And it's just...
And once again, there are plenty of people who are like, hey, step off, and the reaction is not good.
It's usually anger. Usually when you confront someone about them doing, I've noticed that when you confront someone, especially about something like cultural appropriation, their immediate reaction is to get angry and blame you for being offended.
Right. And defensiveness is a huge component. And people
really,
are like,
really bad.
But my spirit is, gypsy or whatever. And then you're like, well, if your spirit were, aligned toward the Romani experience, maybe you would start using a different term.
Yeah, absolutely. That's especially bad, I find, with spiritual people, because they'll bring up something like, I feel this in my spirit or my soul, or I have a past life in which I was a Romani person, and I'm like, I feel like that's just not a good enough reason. It's just not. And I know that we're all spiritual people here, but we got to live in the real world, and that's just not, you're not living in the real world. And in the real world, people are offended by your actions, and they don't give a shit about your past lives. So you need to, that person's not here anymore. That life is dead and gone. You need to adapt that to your new life, and you're not.
Right.
You're not using it properly.
Right.
And I find that's extra bad with spiritual people, because there's always some reason that can't be proven or disproven, right? It's hard to argue with stuff like that sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I would say the way that we get through this is, one, having the conversations, right?
Yeah.
And two, I would say even more importantly, like, if you feel like you are Romani, find actual people who are of descent and see if you can, learn about the culture in a respectful way.
Yeah.
And then see if you actually feel like you are that.
Yeah. Because I mean, what you learn about on, fancy Pinterest boards or whatever about a culture is so skin deep. It doesn't even get to the heart of what that culture is actually about. So you may not actually, you might just like wearing scarves. Like that's not necessarily a deep connection. That's the only way to find out is to ask.
Right.
And that doesn't sound so hard, but people are so afraid to do it. People are so afraid to just ask someone within a culture, am I doing this right? Is it okay that I do this? Can I watch you do it? People are so afraid to ask that question. Why do you think people are so afraid to actually get involved with this culture that they feel such a deep connection with? Yeah,
good question. I would say, one, we fear the unknown, right? We are culturally, we're pretty xenophobic. And also, I would say we fear rejection, right? In this case, especially, we fear doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So all of those elements can kind of pile up and make it feel very difficult to make those connections. But if a tradition is calling to you, then that's what you're being called to do is to make those connections. And I want to say too, and I do talk about this in jailbreaking, but don't go empty-handed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't be the white explorer getting in there trying to get yours and not actually be part of the community.
Yeah, that's still just taking, but with a polite intro. You're still just taking from that culture. Yeah, that's such good advice. That's such good advice. And of
course the other element, right, also is don't expect that these people are there for your enrichment.
Yes, absolutely. I liked that little bit of text. They don't owe you anything. They don't owe you your culture. They don't owe you an explanation. They don't owe you an invitation. They don't owe you anything. And I think that's such good advice because I feel like for the people who would think ahead and think to ask people and get in touch with people, I don't think they would ever think that they would be rejected, that these people would say, no, we don't actually want you in here. You need to leave. I don't think people actually see that coming. And I bet when it happens, it's pretty embarrassing. But people don't actually see that coming, and they still are entering, even though they're being polite, they're still entering under this mindset that they're going to get what they want and that they're just going to be invited in because they asked. And that's difficult, I think, for people to grasp.
Right.
I think that's
right.
A good one.
Yeah. And so in any, I'm sure we've all heard or read, stories about what it takes to be, dedicated to something. And even if we haven't had that experience ourselves, there are teaching tools out there. That's what stories are for. We get to hear about it and then be like, oh, that's what it takes. If you're going to convert to Judaism, right? You don't necessarily get taken on the first time that you go find a rabbi and say, hey, I want to convert.
No, that's not a one-day process.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
So you have to show that you are willing to stick around. You have to show that you are willing to do the work, that you're willing to make yourself vulnerable. Right. And so like that, or, you know, being taken on by a martial arts teacher, like, or, you know, going to Fight Club, right? You stand out there till they say, come on in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no one's talking about it, so how else would you get in? You got to work up to it.
Exactly.
You got to work up to it. Yeah, and I think that's I like that in the second half of the book where it's more you know, you're done talking about each of the 5 phases and you're getting into more the practical application of everything you've talked about in the first half of the book. I like that you still have, you know, dedication and initiation rituals that people can do for themselves, and it's tied right in with this idea of cultural appropriation. Like that is a natural first step. You need to do this first, and then you do the dedication in whatever way you see fit. And I feel like that first part has just been so sorely missing from other books, whereas that second part is one that, you know, I was reading and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of familiar with this. This is really cool. So I like that theoretically, if, you know, when the book starts to catch on and if this really starts to change the way group ritual happens, that you will see this shift where that will just be part of the learning process. I really want one day to, you know, go to a meeting for a coven or something and them introducing their year in a day concept that includes going and talking and learning from a culture, you know, outside of the coven, because they can't give you everything. I'm really looking forward to that just becoming a natural first step in your dedication process.
Right. And the other added element, of course, is that when we enter into these communities, that we try to be of service.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that we, and in whatever way that shows up. Because even if a community is not willing, and I would say, you know, service first and then asking to be taught.
Yeah.
You know, that we go in and we say, what can I do? You know, how can I help? And that's another thing that we have that's really fucked up about our culture is that we will go places and be like, I'm going to help you by doing this thing that you don't want.
Yeah, like a group of nurses that go to Africa to build houses.
Right. I call it helping at people.
Yes. That's a very good descriptor.
Right. So I talk about that actually in the Antiqua chapter quite a bit because, you know, like we're used to helping at our elders.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes they really don't want to, or even kind of need the help. It seems like they need it a lot of times, but nobody wants to feel helpless. Nobody wants that. Right. Nobody wants that at all. There's a great level of dignity involved with the Antiqua chapter. It's a lot about treating with Antiqua with respect and dignity, and that it's not going to be easy to interact with this face of the goddess. Right.
And I think a big part of why it's not easy is because we have all these ideas about how we're supposed to do it, and when it would be so much better, gentler, sweeter, kinder, more collaborative, more empowering to actually go to a person and be like, I would like to be in service to you. What do you need? How can I help you? What's the best way for me to show up for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Instead of having our ideas of like, well, what you really need is... You know?
And again, that sounds so easy, and yet that is such a hard concept for people to grasp. And I found that all through the book. The book was wonderful, but it shook a lot of things loose. It really shook some stuff loose for me. This book shook me up in like a big way, in a good way, but in a really big way.
So what was one of your? This is one of my favorite questions. So I'll ask you a question now.
Okay.
What was your largest challenge with the book? And second question, did that challenge deliver a teachable moment for you?
Later flip the cassette over to side B to continue.
Oh, it's getting pretty good, but unfortunately we've reached the end of part 1 of my interview with author Lasara Firefox Allen. Part 2 will be released Friday, July 15th, so check in then. And in the meantime, pick up a copy of Jailbreaking the Goddess. You can get it from Llewellyn Publications or from Amazon, like I said, for Canadians dealing with the Canada Post strike. There is a Kindle version that you can read right away. So thank you for tuning in to The Fat Feminist Witch, and you will hear me next week with part 2 of my interview. Bye.